Somber time to be alive. We'll get in stream started shortly.
The pressure. They were monitoring the temperatures of the tankers and noticed that the one with the stuck relief valve was actually increasing in temperature. And what that indicates is that the phase change of the contents internally had gone from the liquid state into the vapor state, which means you're about to have an extreme buildup of pressure, which would turn this thing either into a rocket or more likely just a big old vapor bomb. So by doing a controlled release, they punched a hole, I'm not sure, probably using robotics or who knows what, but they punched a hole in the side of the tanker to allow the pressurized liquid contents to flow out of the tanker into a ditch, wherein they lit it then with a flare, and that's, you know, the mushroom cloud that everybody's seen on the news, etc. Now, you know, for anyone second guessing this decision, I'm in the industry, I'm in the chemical industry, the hazardous waste industry. I understand the chemical properties of what's involved here. I think that was the right decision because regardless, it doesn't look like they were able to put the fire out. So you had two decisions to make. Do we just let the fire burn and become a bomb? Or do we let the fire burn all at once and not become a bomb? And they chose option two. Relieve the pressure, save the town, save the 500 people or whatever that didn't evacuate from God knows what injuries, and that's that.
So we are talking about a major explosion here. There is a photo of it at the top, pinned at the top here. Do you think, Frank, did they wait too long? Was that the issue here? I mean, it looks like a mushroom cloud. It was able to. Airplanes were way above the clouds. Were able to look down and just see this massive plume of smoke.
And I'll add one more question to this, Frank. I'm just genuinely curious to what do we know about the damage this is causing? Because I'm hearing a lot of stories, animals getting poisoned, the Ohio River, getting poisoned. I'm using silly terms because I haven't researched this, by the way. Nick has done the work. And I've also heard about the amount of impacts having. About 3 million people getting affected. Can you correct anything I got wrong or add on to it?
Yeah, so real quick, to Nick's question, did they wait too long? I can't answer that. What I can tell you is, if you think that picture of the mushroom cloud was bad, that's a controlled release where they were slowly draining the tankers in a controlled fashion. Option A was let it burn, and that would have built pressure in the tankers, and it all would have leaked at once. So the mushroom cloud would have been 10 times bigger, and every building, within an X thousands of feet radius would have been damaged or flattened. I was getting on Twitter really railing on this Sunday night, Monday. The evacuation zone, in my opinion, of 1 mile was silly. Should have been 4 or 5 because of some of the residual fallout, air quality, things like that.
Yeah, because we know the consequences of this.
To Mario's questions, other things that we have, vinyl chloride's the one that got the attention. I was yelling about it as soon as I heard it was vinyl chloride. One of the fallout byproducts, a thermal byproduct, meaning a byproduct of vinyl chloride when you burn it. One of the byproducts was phosgene. Phosgene is a gas that's heavier than air. It's pretty easy to make. You take vinyl chloride, you heat it up, you get phosgene. They actually used that as a crude trench warfare gas in World War I because it's heavier than air. So if you're down in a 6-foot trench and you're, hiding from overhead bullets, if you flood that trench with vinyl chloride, it will stay in the trench. It won't leave the trench because it's heavier than air. It displaces air. So my primary concern when I heard the leak was happening, and of course the controlled demolition, my primary concern was phosgene as a byproduct. In the Ohio River area, the valley we call it, we have valleys and a lot of low-lying areas, and people's homes have basements in this part of the country. So you got a lot of folks that were potentially at risk with such a huge leak of this heavier than air byproduct. That was my primary concern.
Right.
Secondary concern we have now is that's not the only stuff on the train. There was lube oils, vinyl chloride, butyl acrylate, ethylene glycol, monobutyl ether, ethyl hexyl acrylate, isobutylene, and those are just some of the things that we know about. A lot of those are labeled as carcinogens. They have other bad side effects. After they did the controlled leak, the mushroom cloud, it was very, very dramatic. So it started to get traction in the news, which was really what I was pushing for, to protect the people of East Palestine, get them reimbursed and so forth. Vinyl chloride, its thermal breakdown turns into hydrochloric acid, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and this, deadly phosgene gas I talked about. So, secondary concern after the phosgene, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, not so much. Hydrochloric acid was the secondary concern. So now we've got a big acid cloud, which is that kind of fog that you see surrounding the mushroom cloud. Most likely that's hydrochloric acid going up into the atmosphere. And if you've ever heard of acid rain is what happens when you mix either sulfuric acid or hydrochloric acid or whatever with rain. Of course, a few days later in Ohio, we had 30-mile-an-hour wind and a ton of rain come through. So, the good news and the bad news about that from a fallout standpoint, acid rain went north, acid rain went around the immediate area, acid rain went east, acid rain went south. And I was tweeting, hey, everybody, wash your cars, because if you like your gel coat, you're going to want to wash your car if you got acid rain on it. From a flora and fauna ecological standpoint, there's a lot of sensitivity to, not just all these nasty chemicals, but also hydrochloric acid. So, frogs, fish, birds especially, plants. There's a whole wildlife area in this part of the state. It's a beautiful part of the state. And, now we've got this carcinogenic and poison gas and hydrochloric acid, fallout cloud, which was unfortunate. Again, I was railing for people to get out of the 1 mile zone, get out of the 5 mile zone, because these are not things you necessarily want to be breathing, not just from a carcinogenic standpoint, but from an air quality standpoint. Hydrochloric acid vapors and acid rain will damage your lungs, and certainly not a good thing to do.
Right. So I want to add on just one point to something that you said earlier, just so people have facts and figures here. 5 million people use the Ohio River as their source of drinking water. That's first. Second off, 30 million people live in the Ohio River Basin, which was one of the points that Frank was pointing out, that we're talking about a lot of valleys and everything where you're going to get, water flowing through creeks and such. And so there are going to be a lot more people affected than just those people that rely solely on the Ohio for drinking water. And beyond that, I want to ask you a question, Frank, before I go to Millie. How long could we expect this vinyl chloride and other particles to remain in the air after this explosion?
So my understanding about the vinyl chloride is that in its natural state, it's a vapor, which means it wants to exist like steam, not in the liquid state. So we'll just call it unstable, meaning it wants to exist as a gas or a vapor. So the good news is that easily disperses with wind. Thursday of last week in Ohio, we had 40-mile-an-hour winds at ground level. So, up 500 feet in the atmosphere there, probably had 60 or 100-mile-an-hour winds. So, the good news is from a disbursement standpoint, a lot of the pollution was frankly blown up to Youngstown, blown over to Pittsburgh, blown all over the place and dispersed. Plus, the rain does a good job scrubbing things. I commented on my timeline. One of the ways we used to clean the flue gas from coal plants that used to be in the area was using water. You basically create, rain in the smokestack, and that scrubs out the bad stuff. So, the fact that we had wind and the fact that we had rain, most of that stuff's been washed away. Phosgene has a very low, short half-life. It's about a day and a half in air, so that's no longer really a concern. That's gone. It's been gone for a while. Hydrochloric acid, acid rain hits the ground. It's going to do what it's going to do and get diluted, and that's that. My primary concern right now, it's not really the mushroom cloud. It's not really a lot of the things we've talked about so far. My concern right now is the water, okay? Because we had just the vinyl chloride alone, the estimates are something like 150,000 gallons That's like a third of an Olympic-sized swimming pool worth of vinyl chloride alone. And then there was the lube oil and all the other stuff. And to paint a picture, the Ohio River, it flows from Pittsburgh all the way down to the Mississippi River. It's, half-mile wide, big giant river from Pittsburgh to the Mississippi River. Well, all the way at the northwest corner of that, just outside of Pittsburgh, is where this incident happened. And it happened 15 miles north of the Ohio River. Okay? So 15 miles north of the Ohio River, a trail derails. And a few days later, Weirton, West Virginia, which is on the Ohio River, on the West Virginia side, directly south of East Palestine by 15 miles, they detected butyl acrylate to high enough degrees that they decided not to use the Ohio River as their water supply. So they've actually turned off the pumps that pump fresh water out of the Ohio River to their water treatment plants. They turned that off, and they went to well water, and they're actually now installing 3,700 feet of pipe to go to the Guyandotte River as an alternate source to the Ohio River. Okay, because they're concerned that stuff came from East Palestine. It's pronounced Steen, not Stein. Stuff came from East Palestine, 15 miles down through multiple creeks, and made its way into the Ohio River. So I'm concerned, if you can pick it up to a degree in Weirton, West Virginia, 15 miles away, if you're picking it up to such a degree where you're concerned enough not to use that as your water supply, I'm concerned for everything in that 15-mile stretch predominantly. Okay, downstream stuff in the Ohio River flows east to west. Once you get out of Pittsburgh, west of Pittsburgh, it starts flowing west and southwest towards the Mississippi River. So everything downstream of that, they're all monitoring to see, what they're picking up. Louisville, Cincinnati, Charleston, West Virginia, all these bigger cities, at least for us, these bigger cities are monitoring their water, and they're keeping an eye on this. But I'm personally extremely concerned about the local area, East Palestine and South, Toronto, Ohio, all these small cities that are, flyover country for most folks. They've got creeks, and 15 miles, at least butyl acrylate made its way 15 miles south of that, and who knows what else. And these are beautiful areas. The Little Beaver Creek, which is
quick question. I'm just going to jump in. Quick question from the audience here. I'm just going, any audience members that have questions, bottom right corner, you can ask your questions. Any panelists that wants to speak, just put your hand up or just jump in. I'll ask go ahead, Grant, and I'll ask a question afterwards.
I got a question. So, I mean, this is terrible, right? But a third of a swimming pool, I think that's what you said, diluted by how many, millions of gallons? I'm trying to be optimistic here. Like at what point does it dilute to where it's not a danger?
So to answer that question, the Ohio River is trillions of gallons. So 1/3 of a swimming pool into a trillion, not a big deal. The problem, though, is the creeks that go from East Palestine to the Ohio River. Get on Apple Maps or Google Maps or whatever and check out those creeks. Some of those creeks are only like 5 feet wide at points. So now take that swimming pool. Again, that was a third of swimming pool of just vinyl chloride. Okay, we don't know how much lube oil, butyl acrylate, ethylene glycol, etc. We don't know much of that other stuff. So let's just call it one swimming pool worth of stuff. Olympic-sized swimming pool worth of stuff was leaked. Okay, whatever didn't burn off went on the ground. Whatever went on the ground probably found the storm sewers, and probably found these creeks. So you got a 5-foot wide creek like Leslie Run or Sulphur Run or Bull Creek. Some of these smaller creeks. That ecology is decimated, and at least in the short term. And
are they seeing life affected along the creeks and along the river yet?
I'm trying to get there later this week. Frankly, I'm busy. I've got a day job. There have been reports. There was lots of reports of dead fish turning up. I'm not exactly sure, which creeks it was. They all run.
We have a clip on that here shortly. So.
Yeah. So there's reports.
And we're most likely going up there to do live space there tomorrow. So. That is the current plan. But yeah, I'm going to play a clip from the local news that was going over this
Mississippi River Basin,
based on the fact that there are a bunch of reports on fish going belly up in the creeks, just as Frank said. So.
After this couple saw dead fish in this creek that you're looking at, they're deciding to not take any chances.
Oh, there was hundreds.
Russell Murphy is referring to the fish now belly up in Leslie Run. He and his wife noticed them last night barely 48 hours after the fiery derailment 5 miles away.
This is huge, huge environmental effects.
That's now one of many concerns the EPA now faces.
The impact of the fish, yes, there was a impact of those. However, the levels as we have seen it are protective to groundwater. We are aware there are some wells along that for residential wells.
Environmental cleanup crews were at and actually in that water today. So are these booms, which are used to catch and stop anything that shouldn't be flowing here.
So I'd like to go to Lisa on that one, or Liza, I'm sorry, and ask you here, when we're looking at fish that are dying in this water here, is it pretty safe to say that there is a huge hazard to humans as well?
I think that, first of all, I'm not an ecotoxicologist, so I'm not 100% sure, what kind of exposures the fish had. But if it turns out that it's hydrochloric acid because of the hydrogen chloride release, I wouldn't be surprised that fish would have that problem. I do think that the long-term health effects in terms of human beings is going to be relatively low, because the acute so there's a difference between acute toxicity and chronic toxicity. And so when people are talking about carcinogens like vinyl chloride and things like that's in a work setting where you are exposed to this chemical for many hours at a time for many days a week, as opposed to the acute exposure. If for example, if you get acute dermal exposure, you get a almost like frostbite, because this chemical is so volatile that you have to put it in a compartment that's heavily pressurized, make it liquid. And if that comes in contact with your skin, think of like liquid nitrogen when you're burning off warts. It's going to have a similar effect like that. But it's all, I think that the actual real danger in terms of human health problems came from the explosion and the potential trauma from explosion, rather than and then it burns off. So I don't think that there's going to be an increased risk of hepatic angiosarcomas, which you saw in 11 patients in 1973 that were chronically exposed to high levels of this stuff in an occupational setting. So it's important to differentiate acute toxicity from chronic toxicity, and the potential of having a problem with an acute exposure versus a chronic exposure. So what you may be seeing with the fish, and once again, I'm not an ecotoxicologist, I'm not doing the measuring of the chemicals of the hydrochloric acid or whatever in the water. Hydrogen chloride gets converted to hydrochloric acid when it comes into contact with water. So I wonder if that's maybe not why you're seeing dead fish. But I don't think that that's going to reflect a long-term problem with people.
Interesting. Matthias, I think you wanted to jump in real quick with some statements here.
Yeah, I've been following along looking for official statements from the local and federal level, and I have a few to share with you right now. But obviously, very important, the discussions that we're having on what people are seeing on the ground. Local media plays a key role in discovering that kind of information. So we just already spoke about the fish. There have been examples of someone on Fox 8 reporting that his foxes have been getting sick, some of which have died. We know that some chickens in an area 10 miles away died, and they're being investigated as to why that occurred as well. I want to show you, my thread is posted up in the nest, but you guys can see there's a big statement that was put out to Norfolk Southern Railway from the Environmental Project Agency. They specify that they know that approximately 20 rail cars were carrying hazardous materials, and we discovered today that more hazardous materials than we originally knew about were found on board. Materials released during the incident were observed and detected in samples from several lakes. That's new information as well. But I want to read for you what we just heard from Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg, because people have been calling out his silence. He just wrote on Twitter, "I continue to be concerned about the impacts of the February 3 train derailment near East Palestine, Ohio, and the effects on families in the 10 days since their lives were upended through no fault of their own." He continues to list the names of the boards and teams that he have sent down with the Department of Transportation to assist with the situation, and also linked the Environmental Protection Agency as a good source of information. We also just heard from PBS News a new exclusive interview with Ohio Governor Mike DeWine, who told PBS, quote, "We continue to monitor the air, we continue to monitor the water. They continue to tell us, the EPA continues to tell us that it is in fact safe." Now, there is some false information going through as well, which has been stirring up a lot of controversy on social media and bringing this story to a new light. We want to clarify a few things. Number one, there was an arrest made on a journalist, part of the News Nation programming, and excuse me, I just got some breaking. Okay, we'll bring you that in a few minutes, but I apologize for the interruption. That arrest was made due to a disruption during the governor's press conference on one of the days following the train incident, and there's no reason to believe that it was any sort of cover-up situation. There's also
that's actually a good point. Like, I just got another one here. Journalist Evan Lambert, is that who you're talking about? Was harassed and detained by the Ohio authorities.
That is who I'm talking about.
When he was about to consult the governor about the serious situation of the derailed train that caused the chemical incident. So he's saying that this point here, it states that he was about to consult the governor. And I actually want to play a quick clip.
No, he was giving a live. He was doing a live for News Nation when the governor took the stage, and a trooper came over to him and asked him to be quiet.
But that's question. One thing, I'm waiting for the right time. Like a lot of reports, a lot of people concerned, and I'll go to James afterwards after asking this question. A lot of people concerned about the silencing of the media. I'll play a Fox clip. I haven't heard it yet, so I hope it's relevant. Let me play it now.
The story has been covered. If it's been covered at all, it's about how, there are poor people in East Palestine who have been victimized by this disaster. Well, of course that's true. You want journalists asking tough questions about what's going on. You want to know, for example, vinyl chloride is actually acceptable in the water. I've been trying to get an answer to that question for days. I haven't been able to get an answer to it. Why is vinyl chloride showing up in the Ohio River in West Virginia and Cincinnati, hundreds of miles away from where this accident took place? There are a lot of questions.
Yeah, why do you think it's happening? I think there's a lot of PVC in the water, and it's just diffusing 100 miles away.
Water is the first step.
This is a Tucker clip. You can hardly hear this. You gotta turn the volume up, guys.
Yes, a lot of concerns, a lot of attacks on the media, also a lot of reports of the media being silenced. Matthias, have you seen, is that the case?
That's what I'm trying to share with everyone, that at this point, we have no reason to believe that the media is purposefully avoiding or being silenced by the story. What we are seeing, though, to counter that is a lot of false information on social media, such as reports that the objects, which we covered extensively over the weekend, that were shot down by the United States is some sort of cover-up by the government to suppress the story coming out of East Palestine, as well as other things like there's a big farming industry in Ohio, and people are starting to believe that this was done purposefully to destroy our farming infrastructure. All of that contributes to this story growing and metastasizing into something that it is not, while it is of concern. And we hear the concern in the voices of the officials and the agencies on the ground. At this point, while we do have reports of fatalities among animals and people reporting symptoms when they breathe in and things like that, which must be taken seriously and investigated, it's not at this point as I saw being reported, a Chernobyl type event at this point.
Yeah, so we hopefully, if we do end up being on the ground tomorrow in East Palestine, I think we'll try to talk to some farmers and such that do have, because you have a lot of streams that are running through East Palestine, especially because it's not far from the Ohio River at all. So you naturally have a lot of streams flowing straight that way. And one of the concerns that I have personally heard about, possible livestock or other animals dying is because they're drinking water out of these creeks. So I think that's going to be telling at some point. And I don't personally know, but I know this was another concern as well, is eating food from animals that did drink this water. I know that's been a concern. I don't have any information behind that yet, but that's definitely a question we're going to ask. Before we go to Millie, I want to go to James and get your opinion on this.
Evening all from the UK. I mean, there's a number of different components to this that raise questions. Some really interesting insight. I think everyone needs to take a sharp intake of breath and assess what the situation is in the round. I think there is, yes, a lot of theories that are going out there, but far too early. But part of the reason these conspiracy theories in inverted commas happen is the lack of transparency by the authorities, whether it's through government, national government, local government authorities, and also media. This story has effectively been live by accident for pretty close to 2 weeks. And so therefore it's all come out over the last few days. And because there's been that hiatus period, that raises all these questions and people start going into different directions about what if and what's happened. This must be the reason why. So it's not a surprise why all these theories happen, but there's a couple of concerns here. Firstly, the environmental damage and at what scale. And that will hopefully unearth itself over the next few days and weeks. And secondly, the lack of action by the US government on this to be on top of the story and also mainstream media being on top of the story rather than just local reports.
Yeah, where the press conferences.
There's two concerns here. What is the spread of this and what's the risk to wildlife and also contamination for the population, not just locally, but possibly wider than that. But secondly, the lack of response from the US government on this. Now, I'm not buying into wider conspiracy theories, certainly at this stage, but we need to raise questions about why has this story effectively unearthed itself on a global basis, literally 10 days after the event.
James, you mentioned that the media coverage has been, missing a lot, and there's been a lot of criticism on that front. I'm just wondering what is your expectation here in terms of where's the media missing the most? Is it that it's late to the game? Is it not asking the right questions? Because there has been a lot of mainstream media coverage from Washington Post and Guardian and others, but what are they missing?
I think it's the hiatus. I mean, now the media's on top of it. The horse is bolted on the story eventually, but there's been that hiatus, and I think that largely is a responsibility of the US government, and then the media's come late to that as well. But it comes back to that point, the sense of irony that we're going through and looking at a sort of wider sense. We're told to turn off our gas stoves, but there's major environmental problems around the world, whether it's 3 billion masks in oceans, what's happening in America right now with this sort of toxic event, whether it's to do with the whales issue on the east coast of America, cobalt issues in the plundering of cobalt with child slaves for electric cars. There's a number of these issues, major issues, that should be given more coverage. So we should be allowed to then debate them in the round. And going back to the issue with this particular story, yes, the media is reporting on it now, but why was the time lag? The time lag of 10 days presents two problems. Firstly, well, why weren't the US government on top of this straight away? And secondly, that poses a risk to local communities. If there's not enough information getting out there about what is happening on this story, then people can't make their own assessments about whether their own environment is safe, not just in the surrounding area, but if it's spreading through water streams further afield.
Do you see that as a disconnect between the local community and the major media? Because perhaps these communities are sort of underrepresented in the major media since they're not major markets?
Yeah, I completely agree. But fundamentally, the buck stops with the government. Because, coming from a UK point of view, we've got our own problems with government in this country as well. But I doubt very much that there'd be a time lag of a week to 10 days, almost 2 weeks, on a major environmental story in the UK. And so that's the thing that's the most staggering event of all of this, is the fact that, this is emerging almost minute by minute, quite a bit after the actual event. And that for me, that gives concern about transparency from government, but also about safety, about surrounding communities. So, you've got communities who are completely uncertain about their local environment because they're not getting enough information. It's only beginning to happen, probably far too late, a week to 10 days after the event.
Yeah, let me bring in Alex real quick here if we can. Alex, you have some experience in cleanup efforts that are similar to this one, maybe.
Yeah, so our family, this was about 30 years ago. We had a manufacturing plant. We manufactured cylinders for printing. They were coated with chrome. Therefore, we had chromium acid in our tanks. We did have one of the big major tanks break. We couldn't contain it. Chromium acid was leaking out. We made, there was no way to essentially stop it. So what we had to do was make an executive decision. We called every single aggregate logistics company that could deliver as much 100% crushed limestone type 2. And what we did is we had a 50,000 square foot building, and we had to basically build a wall 10 feet high around the perimeter of the property and just keep on. I think we loaded like 100,000 metric tons. And we had bulldozers piling it all up. We had geotextile put down, and we were able to contain that. So the thing is, I don't understand why they're allowing all these chemicals. This can be contained, and there should be a massive deployment. And you can go to all the local quarries. You bring in that 100% crushed limestone type 2. You surround it. First, you excavate. You lay down geotextile, and you just keep on piling it around, and you build a perimeter and as high as you possibly can, and you prevent the environment from getting destroyed. And I just don't understand what the hell they're doing.
Next, Alex, I just want to quickly, if you don't mind, Alex. I know Tammy is getting late for you, and you've got interviews shortly. But we'll go to you in a bit, Alex. Tammy, just about what you've sent us via DMs. I would love you to give us an overview. And I won't paraphrase what you sent us. I'll just give you the mic, and you can explain it to the audience.
Yes, this is Tammy Burdick. Is it okay to speak briefly?
It is, yeah, the mic is yours.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I hope all of you are doing well. I'm so sorry for anyone that might be directly impacted by this. I'm in Ohio. I'm actually in Cincinnati. And I'm actually a survivor of an environmental illness from contaminated water. So unfortunately, I'm obviously very scared of, the risks. I never wanted to go through another environmental illness again. But though my situation wasn't necessarily directly towards chemicals, it was an environmental bacteria that somehow managed to find its way into the public water. And I wasn't in Ohio actually at the time. I was in the state of Connecticut. But my journey led me to becoming known as the diagnosis detective with the book Diagnosis Detective: Curing Granulomatous Mastitis on Amazon. It's a pretty crazy story. Doctors dismissed me at first. They didn't know what was going on with me. And kind of like Aaron Brockovich Jr., I traced my steps. And I even had the water at my own home tested. It was negative, and that's what led me back to a business trip that I had taken. And there was another professional on that same business trip, same hotel at the same time, that contracted an infection through his ankle the same way that I had contracted it through my breast. So that's a little bit about my story. I'm kind of, very, very intrigued and interested in anything environmental, whether it be, PFAS or whether it be pesticides. I'm on it and I want to avoid it as much as humanly possible. So, I mean, here in Cincinnati, even in January of 2020, the Cincinnati Enquirer had reported apparently this was some new laboratory testing they were doing and found that PFAS were in the Ohio River. So it's like, here we are, several years later, and I wonder, have they been doing anything about that? I mean, if they've been detected, what are you doing about it? And now we also have the risk potentially of these chemicals from this derailment making its way here. And it's like almost to the point where I'm looking at it like we're all doomed. I mean, it's no wonder there's so many sicknesses and illnesses and cancers in this country, and those numbers continue to climb.
Right. They don't care about you.
So, Tammy, you are in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is
I am.
right downstream. We're not talking too far at all. And there've actually been reports already that, this is coming straight down towards you, down the Ohio River. How long did it take for you to end up having having your diagnosis after you were exposed to this contaminated water? I mean, are we talking years and years?
I was diagnosed with granulomatous mastitis, and then it was 7 months later before I found a gene sequencing pathology test that would identify this environmentally associated bacteria called Corynebacterium croppenstedti. And it has an origin of water, sewer, and soil. So with that information, I was there able to be like, okay, I haven't personally come in contact with soil. I'm not a teenage, ninja mutant turtle or whatever they are playing in the sewers. I'm like, the only other possibility here would be water. So where did I get it? I hadn't been in any oceans. I hadn't been in ponds or pools or spas or anything for months prior to my diagnosis, except I did go on that business trip, and obviously I take a shower each and every single day just about here in Cincinnati. And that test gave us that bacteria, which had me trace my steps. I had my water tested, and that's when we traced it back to Connecticut.
So, Aaron, I do want you to jump in on that because you are a medical doctor.
I just want to interrupt it for a second before you move on to the next speaker. The breaking news story that I was tracking before has developed a little further, and I think it warrants alerting you guys on what we're dealing with. There are reports right now on Michigan State University campus of an active shooter situation near Berkeley Hall on the East Lansing campus. We have scanner reports indicate that there have been multiple victims. We'll continue to keep you guys posted, but we're going to resume for now our reporting on the situation in East Palestine.
Yeah, Matthias, let me ask you real quick. Do we know that if there are any fatalities yet?
I'm not going to speculate. There are reports on Twitter via numerous sources that there may potentially be fatalities as a result of this incident, but numbers and figures I'm not going to speculate or go into at this point.
Okay. Let's see here. Okay, well, Dr. Aaron dropped down, so I guess I'll jump over real quick.
I'll bring him up for you.
Okay, good. Millie, definitely, I want to get to the topic. Millie on trains. This is going to be very important here shortly, so I'm sorry to keep you waiting.
Yeah, and by the way, Aaron is back up. If you want to go to Aaron or Millie first, up to you, Nick.
Perfect. I'm going to go to Aaron first. Aaron, you've been listening to obviously one of the biggest concerns about this entire thing are the medical ramifications for having such a toxic substance lingering in the air, toxic water supplies and such. How long would you expect it to take before we actually start seeing issues from some of this toxicity? Obviously, I would say that water would be the worst possible thing, right? Contaminated water.
Yeah, Nick, if I could just comment on that a little bit, probably what you would see if there's contaminated water is gradually developing chronic problems in a given population, probably a regional population. So if you have a tributary, if you have a particular stream that has a high concentration of a toxic chemical, you're going to get very micro doses of that toxic chemical in the water for a period of months to years. And this is where these things can be really difficult to establish causation, because you get a few cases in individuals who are especially vulnerable, either because of genetics or because of co-occurring medical conditions, and they develop a problem. And assuming that the problem is an unusual problem, that may raise a red flag. If there's a very, very rare form of cancer that crops up in a small town among 2 or 3 or 4 individuals, that may raise a red flag, and that may result in the kind of careful investigation that you need to establish some kind of environmental toxicity. But there are other situations in which the toxin can cause chronic problems that can mirror other chronic problems in the population. And the fact that this small town has a higher than expected incidence of heart disease or respiratory problems or dermatologic problems or whatever it might be may go entirely unnoticed, both because those things may develop slowly over a period of months to years after the initial event that creates that toxic problem in the environment, or because the problems that it produces are run-of-the-mill medical problems that local, frontline physicians, or, insofar as they're paying attention, a local, say, county public health authority may not even notice.
Right.
So very often people who try to advocate, the previous speaker mentioned Erin Brockovich. I'm curious as to her personal experience trying to advocate for people that have been impacted by these. Very often you have an uphill battle because you have a burden of proof, or at least the authorities tell you the burden of proof is on you to establish that, this thing that, the big agricultural company, Monsanto or whatever, is doing to the soil or to the water is causing your problem. And that kind of, clear relationship between a complex medical problem that usually has multiple causes and an environmental toxin can be really hard to establish. So I'm just wondering, as a question to that speaker, about her experience kind of dealing with this issue as a victim of a toxin, and also as an advocate trying to bring attention to these kinds of problems, because it can be really, really tough.
Tammy?
You're muted, Tammy.
Yes. So first I want to actually touch on the testing component. I don't know if many of you are familiar with functional medicine, but my surgical breast oncologist and I actually incorporated a functional medicine practitioner into the three of us, which I called the A-team during my journey. In functional medicine, there are a multitude of very specific, almost DNA level types of tests that can be done that you will never see in conventional medicine. When you all get off of this tonight, Google a stool analysis test called a GI map. I did one of those and it told me 4 pages of information about the health of my microbiome. There are diagnostic labs out there that will actually take your urine and look for chemical byproducts. Just to give you a truthful, legitimate example, I will use myself. My functional medicine practitioner did a test on me, and that test resulted high levels of xylene byproduct in my urine. And he asked me, do you have any idea where you're getting this exposure? And I'm like, no. And the most common product that this chemical tends to be in is petroleum-based products like gasoline. he asked me, he's like, are you hanging around at gas stops? And I'm like, absolutely not. No, I'm not doing that. And he's like, well, I don't know where you're getting this. So of course I start doing my own research and come across underground storage tanks. And I'm like, okay, is something like that even possible here? Like, I'm not an environmental expert. I actually called an environmental attorney. They're giving me some tips, information. They're like, go to Google, start searching for underground storage tanks. And I actually came across this like company that was some petroleum affiliation. It was close to where I live. And I'm like, okay, is there some sort of connection here? Is there some underground storage tanks I don't know of? I never found out really where the connection was, but there's runoff all the time from, different types of chemicals and pesticides, and things can get in groundwater. And, who's to say what we're getting exposed to nowadays? I mean, I'm living proof that almost anything's possible. But with your question prior, could you be a little more specific as to what you're kind of wanting from me? If you could be a little more direct, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
That might help me best answer your question.
Very often people that have these kinds of exposures and believe that their medical problem is attributed to some sort of environmental toxin, when they try to get some sort of acknowledgement of that or compensation for that from the company or the entity responsible or from the government, they can meet a lot of resistance in terms of, prove to us that your problem is due to this issue. Most because there's usually a financial interest or maybe even a political interest in not acknowledging or not addressing the issue. They want to manage their risk. They want to prevent lawsuits. They want to prevent having to make a public apology and maybe compensate other victims of the problem. So yeah, I don't know to what extent you have or have not tried to pursue compensation or acknowledgement from public or private entities, corporations, or the government that may be responsible for these toxins. But in my experience, when patients try to do that, very often it's an uphill battle. So my question was really whether you had any
Erin, I'm just going to jump in. She seems to drop Erin. While we try to bring her back up, Millie, I know that Nick has been trying to ask you a question as well. Nick, do you want to go to Millie?
Sure, Millie. Obviously, one of the biggest concerns here that we've seen today, especially, because there's been a lot of people on social media being extra vocal today and yesterday and recently about how was this handled? Was it handled right by, I believe it was Norfolk Southern, who was the operator of the train, and your father worked as a regional manager at a rail company for decades, and you said that his take was, quote, whenever the decision is made to burn, it's always a last resort. Always first and foremost is to contain the chemical. So your father, who was a regional manager at this rail company, how does he think that this should have been handled based on what we know so far?
Before you answer, Millie, I've just got some updates from Rose Alerts, Millie, just quickly, sorry, and I'll give you the mic. Breaking news about the shooting. Here's what we know so far on the MSU shooting. Several 911 callers reported an active shooter at Berkeley Hall Academic Building. At least 6 people were shot with fatalities reported. Gunman now inside the student union, and he's not yet in custody. We've got another person that's tweeted that replied, my father-in-law is at the ER with his friends and just told my wife they've brought in over 10 victims so far from the shooting. So we'll keep you all updated. That's from Rose Alerts that tweeted this. Millie, sorry to interrupt. The mic is yours.
All right. Well, I'm going to interrupt one more time to just remind everybody to put your questions and comments down in the bottom right-hand corner. We're going to be going for a while, and I know you guys have a lot of questions because I've gotten hundreds of them personally today from you guys. So put them down there and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Millie, jump in.
Sure. So my father, like you were saying, he worked in the railroad as a regional manager for a long time. And it wasn't this particular rail company, but it was a very well-known named company, which he asked me not to actually mention. So, but what he actually interviewed with me earlier today, and he really gave me a lot of really good information. So aside from just the tweets that I put out, he basically said that what happens when you get a car in a derailment and the pressure release valve doesn't work, the pressure inside the tank is heated from the fire outside the tank, and it heats the flammable gas on the inside to the point where the rail car will no longer be able to hold the chemicals, and it literally explodes. And it creates a huge explosion, which actually flattens out square mile radius, and it can harm a lot of people. So that's most likely why you saw those evacuation orders coming out and trying to get people away from that area, because it could have actually exploded and caused a lot of death and damage. So that's actually what's called a BLEVE. So if you actually were to look up videos on the internet, like look it up on YouTube, you can actually see BLEVEs and see what could have possibly happened. And that's probably the worst thing or scenario that you can have if you have a flammable car with a failed safety release device. So if you have that, you either have to get rid of the pressure, which is what they did by doing like a controlled device to kind of puncture holes in it, or get rid of the flame. And it doesn't look like they were actually going to be able to put the flame down. So, you know,
do you believe that one of the largest issues here was the fact? Another quote from your father, actually. They are supposed to spread out the hazardous cars just in case something like this happens. Do you by chance know, did they have these cars grouped together? Because I do believe we have the manifest, and it seems as if there were several of them that were stacked together.
Right. So
with vinyl chloride, to be clear. So.
I actually sent him the manifest because he said, really, you know, he knows that you're supposed to have spacing between the cars, and you actually have to have certain buffers. And so until he saw the manifest, he couldn't really say. But I actually sent him the manifest, and after he looked at the manifest, he did say that everything looked like they were on top of it, and that basically you can't have any hazardous chemical cars right next to the locomotive or caboose, which it looks like they didn't have that. Basically, you can't have a whole lot of them together. You have to kind of mix and match with other cars. And that, you know, that's why they had like semolina, which is flour, and plastic pellets, and other kind of non-hazardous, or those like those petrol oils and whatnot. So some of those were or petroleum oils, sorry, they were non-toxic. So he said, just by judging and looking at the manifest, that it looks like everything was done by the book. He said it's just unfortunate because when you have a situation where a train derails and all of those tanks and cars just kind of get mixed and matched and piled on each other, a lot of that effort to kind of keep the spacing and make it safer goes out the window, you know. And you know, a lot of people have been pointing out the hazard with the vinyl chloride, which is a hazard, which it's more of a gas situation, right? But one of the things he pointed out that he thought was actually a really big deal was the ethylene glycol. According to the report, because he looked at it, he said that it lost its load. So a normal tank car is about 12 to 15,000 gallons. So that's like a ton of ethyl glycol being spilled into the water and into the ground. And he said that ethyl glycol is known, it's carcinogenic, and it's known to kill animals. And it's really harmful for the environment because it's a liquid essentially. So that could be what's causing a lot of the dead fish. Actually, it could also just be the ethyl glycol. So he said to look out for
it's
that
like a sweet liquid too.
you might want to be testing
it.
the water as well for the ethyl glycol.
Got it. Yeah, and speaking about that manifest, which does tell
poisonous.
you what cars and what kind of chemicals, and I believe the class of chemicals as well, whether or not they're flammable or hazmat or such.
I've seen people call it the Chernobyl of the US. That's way too big of an exaggeration, or am I mistaken here?
We'll find out.
See, that's something that we're trying to. It's something we're trying to figure out here because depending on. You know, there are a lot of claims that we're seeing.
It's bad, but I mean, Chernobyl was a whole different magnitude. You know, it's
sure.
Radiation is something that lasts for years and years and years.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I'm actually an Ohio resident as well, and I live only about 30 miles away from East Palestine. So I am concerned about the water. I'm going to be testing my well, because you can go do that with your local like water district and city. They'll allow you to for free test your water. So I'm going to be doing that. I'm going to be asking a bunch of my neighbors as well to test their wells for these different chemicals.
Yeah, do that, Millie, and update us on the results. And also, like before going to All Source, Ryan, Frank, and Walk Societies who've been waiting for a while. Greg, just very briefly, you're a resident. I would love to hear your story. You know, there's a lot of theories floating around on the response by the authorities. Would love to get the facts on the ground, Greg. Appreciate you coming on.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, Greg Bolden from America Out Loud. Maybe someone got lost in translation. I'm not a resident. I called residents today because I wanted to get their stories for my show tomorrow. And what I discovered is a lot of stories of people that are experiencing headaches, fluid in lungs, eyes burning when they're returning back to their homes. Spoke with someone at the Serum Fab plant, which is located exactly where it was derailed. They reopened today. Several of their employees had to go back home because they were not feeling well. So I got some recorded interviews with them. I also got confirmed reports of birds that were found dead on the ground, birds that have disappeared from the ecosystem, dead animals. I did hear that there are now fish that are swimming again in the waterways, but I heard something earlier that I just want to kind of correct about the Ohio River. So I ended up calling Negley, which is the town just downstream from where the accident happened. And Negley is seeing where the fish are dead. And so that is really matches the story of this going down to the Ohio River. And West Virginia, see where this is located, if people are not geographically kind of like locked in, West Virginia is only about 8 miles south of where the site was. Getting down into the Ohio River is not that difficult. And it was really a stone's throw away from the Pennsylvania border, which means people on the western part of that border that are located around Route 51, I was unaware, but they closed the roads. So people had not been able to get to work. And the most shocking thing that I was told is homes are going up for sale already, that people are trying to get out of the neighborhoods. So we have some major health impacts that are going on right now. These stories are not being told, so I'm going to try to tell them
Why so great?
the best I can. I appreciate you guys.
Why aren't they being? Have you faced any efforts of censorship whatsoever?
So no, and I heard that the reporter that did face censorship was not censorship whatsoever. Here's what I'll tell you. I've contacted the mayor's office. I've contacted the EPA. I've received nothing. I've even contacted the people that test the water at city council. I've received no information back from any of them, and they've guaranteed a 24-hour response. The residents are all very willing to speak to me. It sounds to me less like there's a censorship of media and more like no one wants to speak out of turn and give misinformation because it's a horrible situation and no one has any good answers.
So do you believe, Greg, that there could possibly be a greater cover-up here? Obviously, that is one of the theories that have been floating around Twitter, especially today.
I don't see any facts to this. We've had a few panelists, and I'd love Walk Societies to kind of comment after Greg on whether he's seen any cover-up whatsoever. But go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, so I actually called out Marjorie Taylor Greene on my show for tomorrow that I do not see a big cover-up. I've been going through this. The only thing that I could tie to it, and this is me speculating, which I don't like to do from a journalism standpoint, but the only thing I could speculate is you have Biden who forced an agreement towards railroad workers, and Pete Buttigieg, same thing. And they worked together. And so is it the conditions of the railways? Were there steps that were missed? Is that the reason why Norfolk Southern didn't have a sensor working 20 miles away when this thing came through Salem on fire? The one thing that I can tell you, there's not a big cover-up, I don't believe, but one of the sensors from Norfolk Southern was definitely not working, which could have prevented this entire situation. So you're going to see class action lawsuits. You're going to see a major, major legal problem for them coming down into the future.
Before we go to Woke Societies, Millie, can you shoot me a DM real quick? Woke Societies, go ahead, jump in.
Hey guys, you hear me?
Yeah, man.
Yep.
All right, cool. Thanks for inviting me here, guys. It's my first one, so I appreciate it. For anyone that might not know me, I'm a live streamer. I've been doing this for 6 years. I do digs. I write threads, as you guys can see today, and all that. I just wanted to bring up the fact that kind of what our UK Patriot guy was saying about the mistrust in the media. The only reason why I decided to even write this thread or even cover any of this in the first place, I didn't really think it was a big story last week, and I didn't really hear too much about it. And one of my listeners, this train where it derailed was literally in his backyard. He was maybe 60 feet from it, and he saw the entire thing. He sent me DMs of it. He was talking to the officials about it, since obviously it was right in his backyard. But I got countless DMs from people that live right in that town, and a lot of them, if they didn't hear too much from the media on it, and even people maybe 30, 40 miles away, they said the only reason they found out about this was through social media and threads and content creators. There wasn't really any kind of coverage of this at all. And it was days after the fact that they realized this. And some of them even found out just yesterday or today. And there are families that are concerned. They have, kids, all that. And, with the current situation, everything happened with COVID, the mistrust with media right now is an all-time low. I don't think this is necessarily a cover-up, but the lack of transparency, or the quickness of a response. And I don't think you're going to have a good response in any kind of situation like this, but it seemed to be that no one wanted to give any kind of answer, and that kind of spurs on people thinking, is there anything else really happening here? So I was notified of this. I wasn't even going to report about this. I had people asking me to dig into this because they weren't getting answers from anyone, and these are people that live in and around these places. And to me, that was very concerning to me. And I got people telling me they have rashes now. They're having breathing problems. Their eyes are burning, kind of what the last speaker was just saying. It lines up with what he was saying as well. And, the dead animals, I've gotten pictures of all that's happening. And my biggest problem with all this is that the EPA, from what I've researched, they gave a response and said that these creeks weren't affected. The water wasn't affected. And as far as I know, the original tests were only given for air and not ground and water. And then these residents were given the okay to come back. And then their answer changed as far as what other chemicals besides that vinyl chloride. And they were given all kinds of different answers after that. So the mistrust, from what I understand from the people that are actually on the ground that live there, is at an all-time high. And I know someone said, there's a bunch of conspiracies going around about that guy that got arrested, the journalist. I've watched the full body cam footage. I watched every angle of that. From what I understand, and from people that were there, that the governor was not speaking. And that journalist got taken out for, I don't know what reason. I don't know. But as far as, them saying he was interrupting anything, there was no interruption from anything that I could see and from people that were there that I know. So I don't know that. And this is also this is kind of throwing fuel in the fire.
Yeah. So Frank, do you know anything more about this journalist that was arrested, and why?
Two things. First, to the journalist, I watched the governor's press conference in real time, and during his speech, you could tell there was some commotion in the back. You could tell his attention was distracted while he was looking at the camera, and then later it came out that a reporter was actually arrested. Later in the press conference, it actually came out that a reporter was arrested, and they asked the governor about it. He said he was unaware why, and then I believe he invited that reporter to do a one-on-one exclusive interview with the governor. So, I don't think there's any cover-up from that standpoint. I've had my hand raised for a while because I just have two final points, and one of them goes to Woke Society's comments a second ago. Water quality and the EPA and cover-ups. Again, I don't think there's a cover-up, but I have a major problem with the fact that the EPA's reports of surface water quality tests, the last report that's issued on their website, and I've got all the links in my timeline I can share. The last reports are from February 4th. That was before they blew the train in a controlled demolition. Okay, that was a day after it crashed. That's the water quality report that they have published on their website right now. That's it. That's all the data we have. So you're talking 9 days later. They haven't provided a single update. Now, if you look at the air quality, they had air quality before the controlled. They had air quality during the controlled demolition. They had air quality after okay? And you could see a spike in pollution temporarily, and then it decreased back to normal levels. Everything's okay from an air standpoint. Why the heck, and I would encourage everybody, put all the pressure on it that you can, why the heck hasn't the EPA in 9 days updated the water quality reports? And then my last final closing comment, because I got to go, indemnification. Anybody that's from this area, and again, I tweeted this, I want to shout out to Cernovich because he retweeted this. Anyone that's in this area, if you're getting financially compensated or reimbursed for being displaced, if you're getting reimbursed from Norfolk Southern, do not sign any release. Do not sign or cash a check that has a memo line that says, by cashing this check, I am, waiving all rights, future rights to sue. There's a lot of concerns out there. There's a lot of carcinogens in the area. Last thing I want anybody to do is give up their future rights and indemnify these people who allowed this, tragedy to happen in their backyard. So again, put pressure on the EPA. We need updates. The last update they provided is from February 4th, 9 days ago, going on 10 tomorrow. Okay. And do not waive your rights. That's all I got. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Frank. Dinesh, I want to go to you, Dr. Dinesh, before going to All Source. From what you've heard so far, I know you've been keeping track of the situation. How serious is this? And is it more serious than they're making it out to be? Is there some sort of cover up, or are we over exaggerating? Dr. Dinesh, can you hear me? You're muted. I'll DM him to unmute. All Source, you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, mic is yours, man, while I DM Dr. Dinesh.
Yeah, so no, I think about the media, I think one of the things that we kind of forget when we're discussing about this, right? Because when this first incident happened, I remember it kind of blew up on Twitter because the governor of Ohio, DeWine, he did institute a mandatory evacuation. But what happened was, and I think we're all kind of guilty of this, is that all our attention and focus went to the Chinese spy balloon incident because it happened concurrently. And so from a national media all the way down, that became the main focus. And I think this is an issue of attention span, right? Or what is the priority? And I think there's a legitimate criticism saying, okay, what is a greater threat? Do we have people in Ohio that are, hundreds, if not thousands of people that be severely affected because of health, economic reasons, mandatory evacuations, et cetera, over to the spy balloon? But I think we all have to kind of do some self-criticism, because I think we are all kind of guilty of this, is that once the spy balloon incident kind of broke, any other story, especially domestically, about it kind of just took a second step, but went way down in the priority list, and everything went there. Because before the Chinese spy balloon incident happened and became public knowledge, there was a lot of reporting on this, but what it was centered on was the mandatory evacuation, right? Because of the health concerns that were affected, and then also because of the controlled demolition or the concern of the explosion, the damage it can do to the local population in the area there. But then again, all the oxygen that we have kind of got sucked away from this. I do agree with Frank. I think, there should be a lot more on the EPA. There has been some statements from, a lot of consistent statements, at least from the local level. And then a lot of the EPA obviously is going to be slow in their response. Into Shizo, I know he's here, and I think he's trying to come up to speaker as well. He DM'd me about this, is that, the EPA has to wait until the area is secure and safe before they could do a lot of safe testing. But now that there's been a controlled demolition, why hasn't the EPA done a lot of these studies? And I think it's a legitimate question to ask this, to make sure that the people in the area are taken care of.
All right, I'm just going to just leave here briefly here. So we're going to take a look at some other information that surrounds this issue. So what happened? So New York Times reports around 9 p.m. on February the 3rd, 10 days ago, train derailed in East Palestine, Ohio, in a village of about 4,700 residents in 50 miles northwest of Pittsburgh. About 50 miles of the train's 150 cars ran off the tracks on its route to Madison, Illinois, to Conway, Pennsylvania. A train operated by Norfolk Southern had been carrying chemicals and combustible materials, with phenyl chloride, a toxic flammable gas, being the most concern to investigators. Huge fire erupted from the derailment, sending thick billowing smoke into the sky and over the town. Residents on both sides of the Ohio-Pennsylvania border were ordered to evacuate, and Governor Mike DeWine of Ohio raised alarms about possible explosion. So while we were looking at various other controversies erupting, including the spy balloon and the UAPs, the consequences of this were just ongoing. Let's take a look at the journo who is currently arrested. Let's take a look at the clip there. Turn this down here.
You guys, he's a national correspondent. You cannot do this.
I'm a reporter with News Nation.
Evan, I'm so sorry. Evan, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Sia.
Roll over, sir. This is horrible.
Can someone help me?
Yeah, we're helping. Evan, I'm sorry. You can't do this to him. This is his First Amendment right.
About doing the First Amendment.
You guys are distracting.
The arrest itself is an aftermath of the altercation, which I saw in a different video.
Why are you arrested?
It's tough to do your job.
So it was really like framing it in a certain way. But in the altercation itself, like this guy was, he's kind of in his ego and the officer was in that person's ego. So it's like one of those typical, you know, macho confrontations. And the journalist stood his ground. I think he had the right to stand his ground. I'm not really sure of rules of trespassing when it comes to the press in certain locations. Stu Peters shows a graphic of different river basins. We have the Ohio River Basin, which is thought to be affected by the explosion. Because of drainage patterns, lower Mississippi River Basin will likely be affected too. Savannah Hernandez reminds us of the different things that have occurred over a rather short period of time. Chinese spy balloon flies over the U.S., green laser spotted over Hawaii. I never even got to the green laser story, but yeah, that happened. Government burning off toxic chemicals in Ohio. Mysterious objects shot down over Canada and also over the Great Lakes area. Train derailments in both South Carolina and Texas today. So just today, 2 additional derailments. This is all within the last week. And she left out several other things that also happened. Gateway Pundit article that basically is titled "More Chemicals Identified in Ohio Train Wreck, Fish and Wildlife Turning Up Dead, Residents Told It's Safe to Return Home." On Friday, Gateway Pundit published a story about the News Nation reporter that was arrested while shooting a live segment from his gymnasium where Ohio Governor Mark DeWine was addressing a crowd on the outside of the building. News Nation's Everett Lambert was arrested for covering what happened a week earlier, on February the 4th. A Norfolk South train derailed East Palestine, Ohio, affecting some 50 rail cars, 20 of which were thought to be carrying dangerous chemicals. Vinyl chloride was one of the chemicals, but there are other chemicals involved. I think this article may cover some of the others. So vinyl chloride is a known human carcinogen. It's been known to cause angiosarcoma of the liver in humans and lab animals. Vinyl chloride is exposed to high temperatures, heat, or ignition, hydrogen chloride gas, which is highly irritating to the nose and throat, as well as trace levels of phosphine gas may be produced. The EPA got involved. They sent a letter. So the letter was to Norfolk Southern, stating that ethylene glycol, monobutyl ether, ethyl hexyl acrylate, and isobutylene were found in the derailed cars as well. This picture of the explosion with this cloud forming. They note that residents are taking to Twitter and other social media to document their experiences with the controlled release. I haven't really seen very many pictures of environmental damage, and I have been looking for them. We know about the report of the fish belly up. Now, why is it that Moore didn't take pictures or cell phone video showing the dead fish? Because, you know, if that would have occurred, it would have been immediately went viral. So that would lead me to believe that probably the situation's not as bad immediately as it's stated, just due to what you would expect. But this assumption of mine is assuming that we're living in a normal world, and we're not living in a normal world. It does seem to be a type of, maybe I should be careful how I describe the situation. In future videos, I'll just give clues to the whole thing. I've given many clues already on the other channel, Spirit of It Meadows. Cal Becker, breaking. 3 train derailments in just 1 week. East Palestine, Ohio, South Carolina, now Texas. This comes amid reports of pipeline leaks, chicken facilities on fire, and multiple UFO sightings. Yeah, what is going on? So here's a Substack article on a topic by Mr. Becker. So my name is Kyle Becker, host of the forthcoming podcast Relentless, and we will relentlessly be pursuing truth about the biggest and most underreported stories in America. Now let's begin our big story. What's going on with all these disasters across America? As America was fixated by UFO sightings this weekend, there were a number of disasters that barely scratched the headlines. We had a train derailment and chemical disaster in Ohio. We had a major pipeline leak in Nevada. This comes after more chicken farms burning down. What's going on? There's an update. Now there are reports of train derailment in South Carolina. Then we have a second update. There are also now reports of truck crash and train derailment in Texas. Let's see the video of that. It's all bizarre for a number of reasons that we'll get into. But first, let's touch on these UFO sightings so that we can put them in context and why the scattered reports this weekend are so weird. On Sunday, the military shot down another aerial object, this time over Lake Huron. It was the third day in a row that the U.S. military has taken down UFOs, accompanying sparse official confirmation of either the flying objects or the wreckage. NORAD scrambled F-16 fighter jets to take out the UFO on Sunday, again with an AIM Sidewinder missile. Adding the vagueness of the report, NORAD said that identifying the UFO was initially unsuccessful. So that's an important point, as that presumes that they then eventually identified it, and therefore they identified it as technology that was within the scope and authority of the U.S. or of a foreign power, and not an off-world power, because otherwise they wouldn't have identified it, unless it's like an off-world power that they identified previously. Northern Command detected the object again heading towards Wisconsin on Sunday and put together a game plan. And one question I have is, like, these different sightings, are they different types of objects or similar objects? This is not exactly reassuring language to send a public that is already on edge after reports of the Chinese spy balloon being allowed to traverse the United States for an entire week before being shot down. In that case, it was an F-22 Raptor that downed the Chinese surveillance aircraft, again with a Sidewinder missile, which may be extremely expensive, after it had swept up a mobile phone and Wi-Fi data along a path that included several nuclear missile silos. It all smacked of Chinese test run and Test America resolve to resist the incursion into U.S. airspace, as well as to monitor our aerial defense response and our communication. That is why the UFO sightings can be viewed as an escalation of airspace incursions and a continuation of the Chinese spy balloon run. It may be yet another Chinese trial balloon leading to further invasions, including potential move on Taiwan. If there's anything that we have learned about the Biden in the previous week, it's that his defense and Chinese aggression may as well be taken to the bank. Literally, he has ignored the strong evidence that pandemic originated there. There is a scientific smoking gun that contains a fingerprint that was the laboratory, according to highly respected experts. We haven't heard a peep from Biden or the IC about such evidence. It has virtually, then on the other channel, I posted a video about some people knowing the coming future events. Somehow in 2019, this is evidence in the chans. It's kind of interesting how it kind of winds from the trains to the UAPs to this like revelation about the origins of the thing that's been bothering us the last 3 years. Kind of a winding little pathway there. I see you, Mr. Becker. Where was I? As virtually ignored Chinese misleading the world about the initial. Oh, okay, I see. Okay, so he's trying to say, like, okay, so we had the big plague event from potentially from a country, and then the country flying balloons over, and then like these other UAPs, could they therefore be from the country, or are they from someone else? I think that's kind of what we're good at getting at. Then you got to look at the alliances. This is a topic I covered in the previous live stream video. Are we dealing with a Russ-China alliance or a Russ-China partly South American alliance, or perhaps a Russ-China partly South American, some faction of the U.S., some faction of other Five Eyes nations, the place down under. Are they all in alliance? Like it's a group of individuals. So they're alliances that could be distinct and well formed. You have to know what the alliances are, and you have to know who the actors are. Truth be told, if anywhere within the Five Eyes nations has an alliance with some foreign power, and there's cooperation, it would be considered treasonous to a certain degree for whichever member nation had people within their government or military aligning with the foreign power. So I guess it'd be really sticky. So you just kind of wonder, if anything like that's happening, how does that work? Then you have the possibility of just some neutral location, perhaps far north or far south, where the rules are different and there are different treaties, and they could just say they're their own people. And could they then form a secret alliance with a specific country and then try to alter the game on planet Earth by aligning with the specific country, be it Russ, China, or whoever else? I'm using these abbreviated terminologies for the countries because of my understanding of how the AI systems operate here. You have to become one with the system here to communicate in the way you want to. So continuing on with this article by Becker. Let's see. Okay, we see I can say safely here. It has virtually ignored China, misleading the world about the outbreak, which arguably cost the world precious time and perhaps even hundreds of thousands of lives. The Biden administration has been muted about China's human rights violations, particularly under the locks. This only adds to suspicion given that Pentagon funding, as well as I don't have one for him. Let's call him Dauchi. As well as Dauchi funding can be traced back to some type of research that happened in a special lab overseas. The U.S. was well within its rights to boycott the Olympic Games in Beijing, yet sent a delegation to participate. Again and again, the Biden administration has turned a blind eye to the totalitarian China's reach and their C's against H. And beyond Joe Biden's loyalty being highly questionable due to his obscenely weak track record versus China, there is a highly plausible scenario that China Joe has been bought. His son, Hunter, raked in a lot of money from the oligarchs. We have no strong reason to doubt that Joe got 10% for the big guy from Hunter's deals. At this point, you can almost take it to the bank that Joe is a China, you know what, and also even this term, 10 for the big. YouTube, which may somehow be involved in the consp, has that as like a term that changes the algorithm of the video, so it doesn't get as much visibility. And I'd covered that previously. Anyways, there is a case to be made that Joe is more loyal to the China interest than those of the Americans. So when a China balloon makes it all the way across North America, only to be downed in the Atlantic, only to be followed by Joe gaslighting Americans at the State of the Union, that this was a strong show of U.S. military defense, Americans have a right to be on edge about what comes next. And indeed, at this time, Americans are kind of on edge. We saw what happened with Project Veritas and the expose there with the fourth ranked person at Pfizer, Jordan Walker. And then like his consequences, O'Keefe's consequences. So we're on edge about that a little bit. And then we have this stuff happening. A lot of stuff that looks like psychological warfare. Okay, so continuing. That came this weekend as a fourth flying object in a week was shot down above Lake Huron. Northern Command subsequently said that this was the last such flying objects that NORAD was tracking as of Sunday night for now. But the news coverage appears to be disproportionate to the significance of these objects. NORAD spokesperson stated in a recent interview that the U.S. military tracks a lot of objects a day, so why is this different? Since there is no official footage of the objects or their wreckage, only a description such as the latest sightings of a flying object being octagon shaped, it is left up to our imagination. And that's important to note there. So we have an octagon shaped object. I believe one of the objects over Alaska, or was it Canada, was a metal balloon with a package attached. And then we've heard the report of a cylindrical shaped object. Then I'd seen in somebody's video, and I think I had just sort of saved it. I'm going to try to find it. I believe there was a general who said that he had used the term object specifically to emphasize that it's not necessarily a balloon. Anyways, keep going here. Are we talking about flying objects with incredible abilities like the one spotted in Puerto Rico in 2013? You remember this video. It is currently impossible to say. This information gap can fuel public curiosity due to it resting a part of the widespread perception of threat combined with uncertainty about the nature of the threat, causing reports on it to dwarf headlines about events of more certain nature, at least seem to be. Such is the case with the fallout of northern Ohio and the aftermath of Norfolk Southern train carrying hazardous materials going off near East Palestine, causing it to burst into flames and stoking fears of a potential explosion. There have been widespread reports of dead fish and game up for hundreds of miles from the epicenter to toxic chemical spill. Residents have reported headaches and nausea amidst residual pungent odor that some have described as a mixture of nail polish remover and burning tires. It is so much worse than what the media is telling us. Well, are you guys going on TikTok or YouTube videos? I haven't seen a whole lot of coverage from the grassroots media, but I expected that should be occurring, and maybe that is occurring now, just to convince the rest of the country that it's a very big issue. You have this TikTok here.
I see so many people talking about the train derailment at East Palestine, Ohio. And all I'm going to ask is that if you do this, you get your facts right. I literally grew up right down the road from East Palestine. My old childhood best friend lives in the fucking town. My current best friend literally lives right next to the town. It is so much worse.
I'm just going to be honest with you. Just calling, like I see it, that was kind of like a believe me look. A smile and a believe me look. Just think of, from your perspective, you're conveying this story, and it is something that's shocking and bad. Would you do that? This is one person who's watching right now. I don't fully buy it.
Than what the media is telling any of us. I'm getting reports from people that are down there right now that they're literally seeing schools of fish floating down streams.
Eyes very wide, a lot of emphasis. Schools of fish. Any photographic evidence? Human nature or something.
Rivers fucking dead. I got a video from my friend, okay? And she's like walking, dude. It's all fucking dead. All fucking dead. And on the top of the water is a really pretty chemical rainbow sheen.
That's nice.
The chemicals are in the fucking water, and they're lying to the rest of the country saying they're not. The water's been contaminated. The soil's been contaminated. The fucking air is contaminated. You literally are about to see some of the worst fucking health side effects coming out of people in that town. It's not even funny.
Okay, so we'll be watching that. After the train derailment, Norfolk Southern did a controlled release of a number of hazardous chemicals, including vinyl chloride, which was also dispersed due to fears of uncontrolled explosion. According to Norfolk Southern Railroad, the controlled release process involves the burning of the rail car's chemicals, which will release fumes into the air that can be deadly if inhaled. Based on current weather patterns and expected flow of smoke and fumes, anyone who remains in the red affected area is facing a grave danger of death. Anyone who remains in the yellow impacted area is at high risk of severe injury, including skin burns and serious lung damage. We basically nuked a town with chemicals so we can get a railroad open, said one hazardous materials specialist. We're getting more details now. The EPA, which has stated that the more toxic chemicals were in the rail cars, about 50 of them in total, that were earlier reported. The EPA sent a letter to Norfolk Southern stating that the ethylene glycol, monobutyl ether, ethylhexylene acrylate, and isobutylene were also in the rail cars that were derailed, breached, or were on fire. One EPA official said that the ethylene acrylate is especially worrisome, describing it as a carcinogen whose contact with it can cause burning and irritation in the skin and eyes. Isobutylene was also on the list of toxic chemicals, which is known to cause dizziness and drowsiness. It's not just people who are at risk of the chemical spill, but our steadily shrinking livestock supply. My video camera footage shows my chickens were perfectly fine before they started this burn, and as soon as they started to burn, my chickens slowed down and they died, said Amanda Breshers of North Lima. If they can do this to chickens in one night, imagine what they're going to do to us in 20 years. It's so surreal an event that it was presaged by the Netflix movie called White Noise that featured a chemical leak following a train derailment that was shot in Salem, Ohio. You can't make this up. Wow. So is art imitating life or life imitating art? It seems from the headlines that we are starting to see a lot more of the later. Recent headlines began emulating popular science fiction, and that is pinging a lot of people's BS radars. So Marjorie of Georgia encapsulated the disparity in coverage between the UAPs and the East Palestine, Ohio disaster as well. Oh, but UAP is going on. What's going on? That seems to be an evergreen question in America these recent years. One journalist trying to get answers. News stations, even Lambert was actually arrested and charged for criminal trespassing when he tried to get live stream video at a press conference on the East Palestine chemical spill hosted by Ohio Governor Mark DeWine. There was a dispute about whether or not the journalist had gotten into the altercation at a press conference, but news nations have released a body cam footage from the event that appears to corroborate the journalist's story that he was just trying to report the news. And I saw the video. They both were a little bit arrogant and kind of, going at each other, but he wasn't really violent in any way. She was arrogant too. Okay. Even acted, I wouldn't say totally professionally, but he is probably owed an apology. Adding to the ambiguity, DeWine has claimed that he did not authorize journalists' arrests and said reporters have every right to report during briefings. This is the issue with the badge. Once you get the badge, you just feel like you have all the power in the world. You just do whatever you want. The same could be asked about the manufacturing and chicken farms fires that were going on amid the avian flu that had wiped out at least 58 million chickens. Oh, yeah, no, we have that context as well. The recent avian flu outbreak over the last, I think 4 or 5 months that's just been lowering the chicken herd and also affecting the price of eggs too. I have more on that forthcoming video since the intriguing research I've uncovered on the latest news in this matter are beyond the scope of this podcast. Suffice it to say, you want to stay tuned for that. This brings us to report about the pipeline leak impacting Nevada, which pressed the governor, Joe Lombardo, to issue a state of emergency on Friday. The leak was first detected on Thursday. It was tracked down to its location in Long Beach, California. Pipeline facility in California that was forced to shut down deliveries of gasoline and diesel from Los Angeles area to Las Vegas and Phoenix due to the leak. Operator Kinder Morgan said that the operation had resumed on Saturday after a brief disruption of supplies. The leak caused 14-inch pipeline in Las Vegas to be temporarily shut down, which caused the public run gasoline on long lines. Gas station across Las Vegas, many waiting an hour to fill up their tanks, according to reports. Let's see if there's anything interesting here to read to you guys. I guess, here's that suffice it to say, Americans' infrastructure and manufacturing-based agricultural sector appear to be under some kind of silent attack. This is either deliberate or accidental, just due to incompetence. It's not entirely clear, but, given the periphery of what we've seen and our ability to deduce things logically, it seems like there's at least some probability if there's deliberate action taking place. So why the lackluster coverage? Are these media outlets covering for Biden? Were the reports phoned in because it was a Super Bowl weekend? And it covers several other topics here. It's a really long article. That's a great conclusion. Also, why isn't the media asking more about this threat to our country? Are these corporations controlled by the state? And if so, we need to keep supporting independent media that can ask questions. And so please subscribe to this newsletter, Wildfire newsletter, and help the independent journalists out there. Well, with the Nash equilibrium game theory, we're going to have something just like that. More independent journalists will arise to fill in the void by the legacy media, which possibly has been politically captured. I say possibly a lot, but may have a bit more certainty in the matter than I'm letting on. Okay, at this point, I'll go ahead and close the stream, addressing the question in the chat from RN Payne. There does appear to be orchestration, but this is a very fascinating world where synchronous events occur all the time. Stay safe out there, everyone. Bye.